Hello. Today we will examine one of the strangest and most disturbing missing person cases ever to enter the archives of United States law enforcement. This is a story that will not be found in the headlines of national news, a tale whose details have been hidden from the public for many years. In October 2011, veteran police officer David Miller disappeared in the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. After 3 days of exhaustive searches, all that was found was his patrol car, his service pistol, and his torn uniform lying on the ground. His body was never found. However, the footage captured on his body camera and the car's dashcam prompted authorities to immediately classify the case. Today, thanks to sources who wish to remain anonymous, we can shed light on the last hours of Officer Miller's life. What you are about to hear will make you look at the wild, untouched corners of our country in a different light. October 17th, 2011, Monday. For most residents of Sevier County, Tennessee, it was a typical fall day. The tourist season was coming to an end, and the endless stream of cars on Highway 414, which runs through the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, had noticeably thinned out. The air was cool and clear, and the mountain slopes were covered with a carpet of red, orange, and yellow leaves. For Officer David Miller, a 34-year-old veteran of the department with 8 years of experience, it was a routine shift. He was known as a calm, level-headed, and highly dedicated employee. A man who never took unnecessary risks and always followed protocol. He had a wife, Sarah, and a 6-year-old daughter, Emily. He was an ordinary man, living an ordinary life. His shift began at 2 p.m. and was scheduled to end at 10 p.m. His main task was to patrol the areas adjacent to the park, check tourist parking lots, and respond to calls. At around 6 p.m., as the sun began to set, painting the sky in cold tones, a call came in on his terminal. The signal was unusual. Not a call from a person, but an automatic alarm triggered by one of the remote weather stations, located deep in the forest, on an old service road branching off the main highway. Such roads are rarely used by anyone other than park rangers and maintenance personnel. The signal could mean anything from a short circuit, caused by an animal getting into the wires, to an act of vandalism. The dispatcher instructed Miller to check out the situation. It was standard procedure. An audio recording of Miller's conversation with the dispatcher has been preserved, and it provides a clear picture of how events unfolded. For the first half hour, his reports were completely routine. He reported that he had turned off Newfound Gap Road onto Service Road number 73. The road was unpaved and washed out by recent rains, and his Ford Crown Victoria patrol car was struggling to make headway. The deeper he drove into the forest, the denser the trees became, forming an almost solid, dark canopy overhead. Radio communication began to deteriorate, and static interference appeared on the airwaves. At 6:37 p.m., Miller reported that he had arrived at the scene. The weather station was a small, siding-covered house with antennas on the roof, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Central, this is 714. I'm on site. Everything looks fine. The door is locked, and the lock is undamaged. The windows are intact. There are no signs of forced entry. The source of the alarm is unclear. His voice sounds calm in the recording, without the slightest sign of concern. The dispatcher confirmed receipt of the information and asked Miller to conduct a standard perimeter check. It was at this point that the story ceased to be routine. About 5 minutes later, Miller came back on the line. The tone of his voice had changed. His professional calm had disappeared, giving way to poorly concealed confusion. Central, I have something strange here. There are tracks around the building, deep prints in the mud. The dispatcher asked if he could identify the tracks. There was a long pause during which only his heavy breathing and crackling static could be heard on the recording. Finally, he replied, "Negative, Central. It's not a bear, and it's not a human. The tracks are paired, like a biped, but the size is enormous, and the stride is vast, about 2 meters. They don't lead to the door or windows. They're just walking in circles along the fence." This was the first anomaly recorded in the case, footprints that did not belong to any known member of the local fauna. David Miller was an experienced hunter and had grown up in the area. He knew precisely what the footprints of a black bear, a cougar, a deer, or any other large animal inhabiting the Smoky Mountains looked like. What he saw did not fit into his worldview. The dispatcher, judging by his voice, was also puzzled, but gave the standard instruction: take no action and wait for further instructions. However, Miller, driven by professional curiosity and duty, decided to go further. "Central, I'm going to follow the tracks. They're heading into the woods, toward the creek. I want to see where they lead. I'll stay in touch." It was a decision that would cost him his life. He left his car with the dash cam running and headed deeper into the woods, which grew darker with every passing minute. All he had with him was his service flashlight and his service weapon. Footage from his chest camera shows him walking along a barely visible trail, made not by a human, but by something much larger. The camera captures his heavy breathing. All around him is absolute silence, broken only by the crunch of branches under his feet. He constantly shines his flashlight on the ground, picking out giant footprints deeply embedded in the soil from the darkness. After about 300 meters, he stumbled upon his second discovery. The carcass of an adult male deer lay in a small clearing. The way the animal had been killed shocked Miller. He contacted the dispatcher again. His voice was shaking. "Central, I found a deer carcass. God, it wasn't gored. It looks like it was broken. The neck is twisted at an unnatural angle. The rib cage, it's pushed in, as if by a huge force. There's almost no blood." At that moment, even the dispatcher realized that something extraordinary was happening. He ordered Miller to return to the car immediately and wait for backup. A team of 2 park rangers was dispatched, but it would be at least 40 minutes before they arrived. But it was too late. While Miller was reporting the situation, a new sound appeared on the audio recording. At first it was quiet, almost indistinguishable against the background noise. It was a low, throaty, vibrating sound, similar to a rumble, but not belonging to any known animal. It came from somewhere in the thicket, very close by. Miller fell silent mid-sentence. The recording from his chest camera shows his flashlight beam darting sharply toward the source of the sound. "Central, did you hear that?" he whispered. But the connection had deteriorated so much that only static could be heard on the radio. He was alone, in the gathering darkness, a few hundred meters from the only island of safety, his car. And he knew he was being watched. The camera recorded him pulling out his gun. The beam of his flashlight darted wildly among the trees, picking out trunks, bushes, and shadows from the darkness. The rumbling repeated, louder and closer this time. And a new sound joined it, the heavy crack of breaking branches. Something substantial and heavy was moving toward him. "I'm going back to the car," he said into the radio, more for himself than for the dispatcher. He turned and ran. The camera shook, the image blurred. Behind him the sound of pursuit grew louder, a crushing crack, trees breaking, and the same low guttural rumble that seemed to make the ground vibrate. The last thing the dispatcher heard before the connection was finally lost was David Miller's muffled scream and a sharp, deafening crack, like a burst of static electricity. After that, there was complete silence in the air. The search operation began that same night. 2 rangers, the first to respond to the call about the loss of contact with the officer, found his patrol car exactly where he had left it, at the turnoff to an abandoned weather station. The engine was still running, the headlights cutting through the thick darkness, the driver's door ajar. Miller's notebook lay on the seat, and the dashcam on the dashboard continued to impassively record the empty forest road. It looked as if the officer had stepped away for a couple of minutes and was about to return, but he didn't come back. The Rangers were experienced men who had spent their entire lives in these woods. They immediately realized that something was wrong. Following protocol, they reported the situation and began a preliminary search of the area. The first thing they found was the very tracks Miller had mentioned. One of the rangers later said anonymously that when he shone his flashlight on the first print, a chill ran down his spine. The print was clear, deep, and utterly foreign to the environment. It looked like a massive, bare human footprint, but with 3 thick, broad toes ending in something like blunt claws, and it was intense, as if the creature that left it weighed at least 400 kilograms. At dawn on October 18th, a full-scale search operation began. More than 100 people took part. Sheriff's office staff, volunteers, and an elite team of trackers from the National Park Rangers. A field headquarters was set up. The area was divided into squares, and a helicopter with a thermal imager was sent into the air. But the forest was reluctant to give up its secrets. The Great Smoky Mountains cover almost 2,500 square kilometers of wild, rugged terrain. Dense undergrowth, steep slopes, deep ravines and canyons made the search extremely difficult and slow. The teams moved at a snail's pace, combing every bush. The first day yielded no results, other than confirmation of the initial data. The tracks did indeed lead from the weather station to the place where the deer was found, and then broke off at a small stream where the rocky soil did not preserve any prints. It was then that strange things began to happen that did not make it into any official reports. The canine experts brought in to investigate were faced with an inexplicable problem. Dogs, specially trained to search for people, picked up Miller's trail from the car and confidently led them to the deer carcass. But then their behavior changed dramatically. They began to whine, tuck their tails between their legs, and the hair on their necks stood on end. Some lay down on the ground and refused to move. Others, on the contrary, became aggressive, growling and barking at the dark thicket, but categorically refusing to go there. One of the dog handlers, a man with 20 years of experience, later said, "I have never seen my dog behave like this. It wasn't just fear. It was primal terror. It sensed something there that it considered to be the ultimate predator, something from which one must flee without looking back." By the evening of the second day of the search, the atmosphere in the camp became tense. Many of the searchers, especially the locals who had grown up hearing stories about forest spirits and strange creatures, began to whisper among themselves. There were reports of weird sounds that people heard at sunset, a low, guttural rumbling that echoed through the ravines. Several volunteers claimed to have seen something moving quickly between the trees out of the corner of their eyes, something large, dark, and unnaturally fast. The operation's leadership dismissed this as fatigue and overactive imaginations, but a sense of collective unease grew. People felt like hunters rather than the hunted. The feeling that they were being watched from the darkness became almost palpable. The breakthrough came on the third day, October 20th. One of the search parties, making its way through a dense ravine about 2 miles from where Miller was last seen, stumbled upon his flashlight. It lay in the mud, its body not just broken, but crushed, as if something weighty had stepped on it. A few meters from the flashlight, they found his radio, also crushed. A little further on, At the bottom of the ravine, the searchers made their most important and most terrifying discovery. Fragments of his uniform were scattered over an area of about 10 square meters. The sight of these items left even the most hardened veterans stunned. This did not look like the result of an attack by a bear or a cougar. Animals tear and shred clothing to get to the flesh. Here, everything was different. His thick shirt was torn into small strips, as if it had been put through an industrial shredder. His pants suffered the same fate. But the most terrifying thing was his Kevlar bulletproof vest. It had been pierced through in the chest area, but not by a bullet or a knife. There was a vast, torn hole in the material, and the vest itself was bent in half, as if it had been squeezed in a giant vise. Experts would later say that it would take several tons of force to deform a modern bulletproof vest like that. Next to the remains of the vest lay his pistol, a Glock 22. The magazine was complete except for one bullet in the chamber. One shell casing was found nearby. Officer Miller had only managed to fire one shot. Bloodstains were found on the ground and on the remains of the fabric, but there was catastrophically little of it. Most importantly, not a single fragment of the body was found. No bones, no tissue, no hair, nothing. Only torn clothing and broken equipment. It was as if whatever was inside had evaporated. On the same day, the search operation was effectively called off. People in plain clothes arrived at the scene, failed to identify themselves, and yet had federal authority. They cordoned off the entire area and politely but insistently asked all civilians and most of the local police to leave the area. All evidence found, including recordings from the dashcam and body camera, as well as communications with the dispatcher, was seized and classified under the pretext of an ongoing investigation. The official version for the press, which was never widely circulated, was dry and concise. Police officer David Miller went missing while on duty, presumably the victim of a wild animal attack. The case was closed, but for those who were there, who saw the tracks, the behavior of the dogs, and what was left of the officer's uniform, one thing was clear. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a cougar. Something else lived in the forests of the Great Smoky Mountains. Something powerful, intelligent, and vicious, and for some reason, the authorities wanted to make sure that no one ever found out. What you are about to hear is based on the testimony of a man who had direct access to the confiscated video footage. This man worked as a technician in one of the forensic laboratories, where the recordings were sent for analysis before the case was classified as top secret. Risking his career and freedom, he made a copy of the files. He claims he did so because the truth about David Miller's death deserves to be told. According to him, what he saw still haunts him to this day. The analysis began with the patrol car's dashcam. The camera, mounted under the windshield, provided a wide but static view of the road and the edge of the forest in front of the car. Most of the recording was monotonous. Officer Miller gets out of the car and walks into the forest, lighting his way with a flashlight. Then, for almost 20 minutes, nothing happens on the video except for the gradual deepening of twilight. But then, the action begins. First, Miller's flashlight appears in the frame, moving chaotically as he runs out of the forest, straight toward the car. The sound recorded by the dashcam microphone is terrifying. It is a mixture of the officer's heavy, panicked breathing, the crackling of branches under his feet, and another, far more terrifying sound. A low, rumbling and deafening crunching of breaking trees, indicating that whatever is chasing him is not running along the path, but breaking through it, crushing everything in its path. A few seconds before Miller was about to run out onto the road, his pursuer burst out from behind the trees on the right side of the frame, and at that moment it became clear why the authorities had tried so desperately to cover up this story. The creature caught on camera did not resemble any animal known to science. It was huge, at least 3 meters tall, and moved on 2 legs. Its body was disproportionately thin, with unnaturally long, thin limbs that moved with frightening speed and fluidity. Its skin was pale, almost white, with grayish spots, devoid of hair or fur. But the most shocking detail was the absence of a head in the usual sense. In its place was a smooth, oval formation without eyes, nose, or mouth. The source of the rumbling sound was a vibrating slit in the area of its chest. It leapt onto the road in one giant jump, cutting off Miller's path to the car, and froze for a moment in the headlights. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest again, but from the other side, clearly chasing its prey. The last thing the dashcam recorded was Miller's headlight beam suddenly veering to the left, deep into the thicket, and a receding scream. But the most terrifying footage was captured by the officer's chest camera. The recording was chaotic and intermittent, the image constantly shaking. The first few minutes show a desperate run through the dark forest. Miller is breathing heavily, almost suffocating, stumbling, falling, getting up again, and running. Behind him, the sound of relentless pursuit can be heard constantly. He cannot see his enemy, but he feels his presence everywhere. At one point, he stops abruptly, realizing that he has been cornered at the foot of a steep slope. He turns around. The camera, mounted on his chest, looks straight into the darkness. He shouts something unintelligible and raises his gun. At that moment, a dark silhouette lunges at him from the darkness. A shot rings out. The muzzle flash illuminates the attacker at point-blank range for a split second. This is the most transparent image of the creature in the case file. It stands directly in front of him. Its long, arm-like limb with 3 clawed fingers is stretched out toward the camera. Its smooth, faceless head is tilted to the side, as if it is curiously studying its victim. A dark mark is visible on its pale skin where the bullet hit, but it does not seem to have caused it any harm. There is no reaction to the shot. The next few seconds are pure horror. The camera captures the creature's second limb striking Miller in the chest. There is a sickening crack as the Kevlar of his bulletproof vest breaks, and probably his ribs. Miller falls onto his back. The camera is now looking up at the night sky through the intertwined branches. The creature's long fingers appear in the frame and grab the lens. There is a screech of metal and plastic, then another crushing crack, and the recording cuts off. A source from the lab claims that after viewing these images, the room fell silent. It became clear that Officer Miller had encountered something that should not exist. Subsequent analysis showed that the creature possessed incredible strength and speed, and its skin was resistant to small-caliber firearms. The official conclusion, compiled for internal use, was brief. The attack was carried out by an unidentified biological object. According to the source, the reason for concealing the truth was cynical and straightforward: to prevent mass panic. The Great Smoky Mountains is the most visited national park in the United States. Admitting that an unknown, extremely aggressive and intelligent predator inhabited these forests, against which humans were powerless, would have had catastrophic consequences. It would have meant the closure of the park, the collapse of the region's tourism industry, and a wave of fear across the country. The death of one officer, written off as a bear attack, was an immeasurably smaller price to pay for the authorities. David Miller's story did not have a happy ending. His body was never found. His wife and daughter were left without a husband and father, receiving only a standard notification of death in the line of duty. But his story is a terrible reminder. A reminder that there are still blank spots on our maps, and that in the wildest and most untouched corners of nature, there may be creatures that humanity is entirely unprepared to encounter. Officially, the case is closed, but those who know the truth understand that it is not just a creature that lives there, hunting.